You're listening to We Deepen Media.
Have you heard? The We Deepen Podcast Network has a new show. The Elevate to Legendary podcast by Dr. Nikki is a journey to activate your fullest self-expression. Dr. Nikki interviews leaders who have transcended perceived limitations in order to make a meaningful impact. Guests share their stories to teach you how to optimize your body, brain, and spiritual connection to manifest a truly fantastic life. Be sure to search for Elevate to Legendary with Dr. Nikki in your podcast app or go to wedeepen.com/podcasts to subscribe now and listen later. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Deepen with Christina. I'm your host, Christina Weber, founder of We Deepen and Feminine Weapon, and also a certified professional coach supporting experienced designers and those on a journey of self and social discovery. This podcast follows my entrepreneur journey and shines light on the human connection industry. You meet transformational coaches, festival producers, relationship experts, and people who are passionate about love and authentic connection. While listening, make sure to go check out the calendar of upcoming social and transformational experiences at wedeepen.com and register to meet us in person. While chatting online and connecting through this podcast is fun, I'm mostly interested in being with you in real life. In this episode, you meet Sona Tatoyan. Sona is an accomplished Syrian, Armenian, American stage film actor, writer, and producer based in Berlin and Los Angeles. She's a graduate of the William Esper Studio in New York City, holds a BA in theater, English literature from Wake Forest University, where the mentorship of poet Dr. Maya Angelou was instrumental in inspiring her work today as an artist and an activist. To go even deeper, Sona is a certified yoga teacher and holds a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo. Wow. Well, at her family home in Syria in 2019, Sona discovered her great-great-grandfather's shadow puppets in a trunk in the attic. At the time, she was reading the internationally treasured 1001 Nights. This is a book. It's a collection of Middle Eastern folk tales compiled in Arabic during the Islamic Golden Age. The shadow puppet spoke to her, and the book of stories within stories inspired a personal story of transformation and healing of multi-generational trauma. Sona has written, produced, and will be performing her story as Azad, an immersive theater piece. You can check it out in Los Angeles in April of 2022 and other destinations in the near future. This episode is deep. Sona is brilliant. Listen in.
I went back to Syria in 2019 for the first time since the war had happened. So the last time I was there was just weeks before the Syrian crisis began in early 2011 to visit my grandmother, So our family home there has been there for 4 generations, so that's literally the house that my mother was conceived in, where my grandmother went to as a bride, where I went every summer of my life since I was 9 months old. So it was the one consistent place in my life, whereas in the US, like you said, I'm first generation Syrian, Armenian American. I'm the first member of my family born in the US. My parents were immigrants from Syria. And here we were very nomadic. My father was a physician. And so he got his residency in Baltimore. Then we lived in a small town in Alabama, then a small town in Indiana, all places with huge Armenian populations, by the way. Not. And then eventually made our way to Los Angeles. And then, then I went to school on the East Coast and then lived in New York City. So in the US, there was no kind of like consistent place, but that home in Aleppo was that side of not only consistent for me, but like 4 generations, of root and consistency. And so, to go back there in early 2019 to a completely abandoned home was pretty shaking, to say the least. And, I was invited to go meet a artist, a shadow puppet artist. There was an article in the BBC that talked about Syria's last shadow puppeteer. So it's interesting because it was like coincided with me having learned that my great great grandfather was that kind of shadow puppeteer. And so it was all very weird. And then I had heard that some of those puppets still existed in the attic of our family home 100 years later. So I actually had made this joke, to my uncle, like, what do you mean they're in the attic? Like, they escaped the Armenian genocide 100 years ago, and now they're in the war in Syria. Like, somebody needs to save the puppets, like Operation Save the Puppets, And so I feel like I kind of put that out into the universe, and then years later, just this kind of series of serendipitous events with the article in the BBC and then being invited to Syria to meet this puppeteer and so forth. And so I was only supposed to be there for 2.5 weeks to do all this. And then something happened, which kept me there for almost 4 months. And that's the story of the show. So, and everything that kind of came through that.
And so did you stay in the abandoned house?
Yes, I was in the abandoned house, and I couldn't move, and so I was sort of forced to be there. I mean, talk about being forced to sit in darkness, literal darkness. There was no electricity. There was barely water. There were missile explosions going on every night still in the city, like a clockwork symphony, from like midnight to 5 a.m. And you just realize the things that we get used to, like for the people living there, it was like normal, and it was actually better than it had been because the sort of, it was on the outskirts of the city whereas the years prior it had been really in the center. So for them, it was like, okay, well, some of the shit is going on like outside and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, but it sounds like, Christina, it sounds like fireworks. Bombs exploding and missiles sound like fireworks. So there's that, you're like, oh, okay. And so, so I was sort of forced to sit there and confront, many things, the emptiness of this house, which had always been filled with generations of family and my discovery of these puppets, and it was me and the puppets in this house, me and 150 shadow puppets, that I was literally talking to be like, what do I do now? Like, what am I supposed to do with you? And they spoke back. They spoke back. They had information to give.
And what did they say? What were they speaking?
Well, that's the story of the show. It's like, it really felt like, I came to understand at the end of this, that this was a summoning. These puppets, they're handmade leather, multicolored puppets. They were used in shamanistic rituals and magic, for centuries. And the box I found, the trunk I found, a wooden trunk. It was like out of a fairy tale, like some kind of like Narnia thing. Like you go into the attic of your abandoned home and you find literally a magic trunk, full of these puppets and old metal magic tricks and cards, because these artists, like I said, they used them for magic and performed all other sorts of magic. So it was like I found a magic box, and so everything about it felt very sort of mythopoetic and like outside of like, all right, the events are happening. The thing that got me stuck there, it was beyond me. Like, I'm like, all right, I am going to surrender now to this. And sitting in that house with nowhere else to be able to go, I began to sort of go deeper into the drawers and the this and the that. My grandmother had died there during the war, and the room that I was staying in, her room was as is, like the wrappers in the drawer next to me, her medications, her makeup, and just beginning to clear things out and bring the house back to life, over the course of those months. But yeah.
What's coming to me is oftentimes being an event producer and working in the event world, specifically around transformational experiences, there's this idea of safety, of this is a safe space.
Right.
Sometimes, I cringe a little bit when people who, are facilitating say that this is a safe space, because I'm like, well, you don't really know what's going on inside of anybody to say that this is going to be a safe space or what could potentially happen. I cringe because I feel like that safety is almost like each individual's own responsibility to find safety in the chaos of the world.
Yeah.
Now you're in this moment in this house by yourself. I could say foreign country, but it's not really a foreign country to you because it's your home base. I mean, this is like the consistent grounds that very well, but it's also now transitioned. There's, as you said, your grandmother's medication who's since passed away is right there. Like, it's eerie. Yeah. That can seem really eerie. How did you feel safe? Did you create a sense of safety in that environment?
Yeah, it's so interesting. You saying that, I just got goosebumps on my legs. It's hitting on something. It's wild. Like being Armenian, having sort of like inherited a lot of trauma, generational, intergenerational, but also like understanding the familiarity. Like whenever I've been in Turkey, for example, it's like, it's very complicated because there's such a familiarity to me, which feels like home, my family were multilingual. They spoke Turkish and Arabic and all. So those sounds are familiar, but it also is the place where the trauma happened. So it's this complicated thing of like, oh, the source of love is also the source of the wounding. So it gets really, really complex, in how you navigate that. They're not two separate things. Like, this is trauma, this is, safety. It's like, but wait, what if it's entangled, and you're riding the wave of that entanglement always. And so there I was in this home where like, I literally took my first steps in this home, and, and it had been this like root, this source of consistency. So within the walls of that home was such a sense of visceral, like in my DNA level of like, like this place is like my root container. Yet at the same time, of course, there's the no light. We're losing water for days. It's freezing. There's nothing, so again, like this kind of juxtaposition of like safety and non-safety. It's very complicated. I don't know how to even articulate it like beyond that, so it's just the point where you have to. I remember I was facing a lot of terror when I was there, a lot of terror because of a number of things that were happening. And I reached out to my Buddhist teachers, Trudy Goodman and Jack Cornfield, and literally had a call where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm sitting here meditating. I'm trying to be, but it's just waves of terror and so forth. And it was, there was this thing of like, you just continue to do that. Like sometimes there are no quick, get rescued plan, you just continue to do that until you just see the next right action, to catalyze a movement in your situation. But sometimes, Christina, we just have to sit in it. We just have to fucking sit in it. And in our spiritual circles, we talk a lot about healing and safety and transformation. Those things are not just words, they're processes that take time, and they move a little bit forward, then they slide a lot back, and then they move a little bit forward. It's super elliptical, or at least non-linear, how that happens. But we always want to be like, yeah, I'm healing, I healed, I did that, I did this, and this, and now this is going to happen. And it just doesn't work like that. And so all I've learned is that you just got to keep sitting until it kind of reveals itself, and it's super painful and uncomfortable. But like sometimes life just forces that on you because it's what's necessary.
Yeah, it's resonating too when you mentioned about the love and wounding, and is it love? Is it wounding? Is it the mixture of the two? How do we even have the words to describe those particular items? I don't know.
Yeah.
So you're in this house and you're reading the book 1001 Nights.
Yeah. Again, there was something so mystical about the whole thing that I had been called to just take that book with me. I'd always known about this book. It's a cornerstone of Middle Eastern literature, from like the 13th century. They were oral stories from like India, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, the Near and East, Middle East. But I had never read it, and so, but something about this trip was like, let me just take this with me. I had began to think I'm creating a TV series right now, in which I had recognized that there's going to be something fundamental about 1001 Nights that in my TV series. That much I knew. That was just, I was intuiting that because the sort of the heroine of 1001 Nights is this Middle Eastern storyteller, Scheherazade. And she is the one who's telling the stories night after night that make up 1001 Nights. So in some of those stories, like are very popular and Aladdin, for example, everybody knows Aladdin. That's one of the stories from 1001 Nights, and so, but Scheherazade, there's a frame story to 1001 Nights, and it's her and this king, and her kind of journey of, she's telling him the stories night after night under threat of death. And it's, he experiences a trauma, he experiences, his wife cheating on him, has a complete trauma response of killing the wife and killing the lover. And in his, pain and rage, decides that, what, all women are bad. And so every day he'll marry a new one and kill her the following morning. And so that goes on for a while until this woman, this kind of brave, bold, bookish woman, approaches and offers herself to be next and takes him on this journey of story, and the show extrapolates on this, exactly how, because this was my epiphany. Like when I was reading the Nights and this frame story, I'm like, this is a really fucked up story. This guy is basically raping and killing women. And then this chick decides she's going to go and offer herself up and, and ends up doing so and eventually becoming the queen. Like she takes him on this journey of telling stories, night after night, captivates him so much that it begins to shift him. And so in all my work around intergenerational trauma and the stuff I've been working on for my TV series and just my own exploration of myself, and my inheritance and being first generation and being this bridge person, of not quite belonging in the US and not quite belonging in Syria and not quite belonging in Armenia, in each of those places, I'm always seen as the other. So in all of sort of my life work around this, it was, it was like all these things kind of finally like married in my mind. And I'm like, hold up, this is actually a metaphor for how we heal. This frame story, and it's a woman, and it's a Middle Eastern woman at that, in the Western imagination, the Middle Eastern woman, when people say that often, like, what do you think of? Like subjugated, living in violence, one of 5 wives, all of these kind of like negative connotations. Or the Middle East, what is the Middle East? A place of dictatorship, war, violence, inequality. Those are the Western associations to our region of the world. But hold up, like pull back, in a reframe, which so much of this story is about reframing. You were talking about like how we frame things, how we see them, right? And you pull back and it's like, wait a minute, actually, 1001 Nights in these stories told by a woman, right? She's the glue of all the stories, is the genesis of modern storytelling. It has inspired everyone from Borges to Marquez to Tolstoy to Proust to Angela Carter to Guillermo del Toro. I mean, it's just like the list goes on and on and on and on of the artists over the last centuries that have been inspired by the Nights. So it's like, wow, I mean, talk about a potent reframe. Like, instead of the Middle East, my part of the world, being this like backwards, war-ridden dictatorship, led place, it's the seat of culture,
So the first time I heard of 1001 Nights is in that initial conversation with you.
Yeah.
It was a new story to me. And if I can recap that story, it's, the king's wife cheats on him. So he goes, he kills his wife, he kills the children, and then he decides he's going to marry and kill a new woman every night.
Yes.
And then this one woman comes and she says, I can stop him. I'm going to tell him a story each night.
Yes.
And so that's where all the stories comes into play. Now, does this specific woman, is she aiming to come in to play hero? Like, what's the inspiration for her to play the role that she's playing? Is it, I can conquer him, I can defeat him? Who is she?
I think it's, I can transcend his pain. I think I can help him transcend his pain. It's the wise part of us, I mean, what I realize is that all the characters of this frame story, and I'm not going into detail, there's the king's vizier and Scheherazad's sister, and and all of these things play a role in this. But I think Scheherazade is that kind of untraumatized part of us, the wise part of us, the higher self of us that can pull back and go, I'm not going to do a vigilante operation to counter this violence with violence. Like, we could put an organized group of people together and go kill this crazy king, and get rid of it. But energetically, what's that going to do? Only perpetuate more of that energy, right? So her capacity is fueled by deep wisdom, which is like, how do we change vibration? How do we change energy? By transcending it, not just going against it. So she's countering his destruction with creation.
So you mentioned wisdom and you mentioned creation. Where does love fit into this?
It's the encapsulation of all of it. Love is the patience. It's the courage. It's the wisdom. It's the gentleness and the creativity to see beyond, those wounds, to be able to take our small self out of the equation, to pull back, to talk in like cinematic terms, pull back the frame, and be able to see something bigger than us. That's love, because that's another word. It's tossed around a lot. I love you. I love you. I love you. But love is action. Love is generosity. Love is giving, not necessarily a transactional way, but without expectation. Love is our divinity. So,
and when we add love is also boundaries, and it also is spaciousness. It creates space.
Yes.
It's non-clingy.
Yes.
It's detached.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. All of those things, but love for yourself and for the other, it's like that, what you said encapsulates like the whole of it, right? It's not just like, let me give, and without any sort of, but it's all of that. So it's having the patience for the other and yourself, having the wisdom to see the other and yourself, like, it's all of that together.
How has this discovery, I know it has inspired creation inside of you.
Yes.
How has it affected your own personal relationships and world itself?
Yeah, it's interesting. it's been such an organic process, like the building of this show. When I was in Syria, I came back, after those 4 months, and was connected to, the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at Harvard University, and was asked to give the Hrant Dink lecture there about my time in Aleppo. And I had the puppets, and a puppeteer came with me, and after my talk, performed with them for the first time in a century. So there was a performative aspect to that. And it was really like very intensely moving for me to see these characters are back in action after, a century. And then, some time went by. That was the fall of 2019. And during COVID, I moved to Armenia. The summer of July of 2020, I moved to Armenia, and I had met a man, and I thought, oh, this is, after a long divorce and an intensity, like for 8 years, I had been in a relationship, and I met a man, and I thought, I'm going to marry this man. I'm going to move to Armenia. I'm going to marry this man. And I got to Armenia, and another war comes. There's the whole Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan attacking, and the next thing I know, this idyllic place, which had gone through a nonviolent revolution 2 years before, and was literally like Armenia was marked on major lists around the world as like one of the top democracies in the world, and this burgeoning economy and like all these things. All of a sudden, we were in a war, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, am I just on a cultural war tour? Like Syria, now I come to Armenia, and now it's happening here. Like, fuck, And then the relationship I was in, the stability of that relationship began to reflect the stability of the country. So I'll just say that, and that quickly devolved. But it gave me a lot of information around trauma, because I saw things play out in that relationship, and, the inability to sort of face childhood wounds, in our connection. That got me thinking deeper around that. And then I was asked to give a talk about storytelling and trauma healing, which I've done, a few of these, in the last several years, just because it's centered on like all of my obsessions, like as an artist. And a man who had been a friend who I had met in an ecstatic dance class, I began to share this story with him, a Persian man. And he became really moved by it. He listened to my talk and so forth. And he's an event producer and, was doing an African event. And I said to him one day, you should do a Middle Eastern event. Like, you're Persian, you hear the sounds of those instruments and you begin to weep. And he said, you're right, you need to tell that story. And I was like, okay. And so what's it called? And he's like, 1001 Nights. So we created an event, and in LA, and that was a whole new world to me, Christina. Like, I'm not a party chick. I'm not into that whole, like I would go religiously to ecstatic dance, like therapy, but like, in that super sober, conscious, like movement is medicine, right? Not all of the accoutrement that comes, with these things sometimes, in these event spaces. So it was a radical new world for me. And we pulled our resources together. Like, I brought in the artists and the food, some of the artists and the food, and he pulled the production together within 3 weeks. And we had this event, and I got up on stage and I told this story, and the response was like, overwhelming. Just the story of 1001 Nights and my realization of it being a map to healing trauma. And people were like, this should be a TED Talk. This should be a thing. Like, it's too long for a TED Talk. And it's about storytelling. I'm a storyteller. Like, this is not a TED Talk. If it's anything, it's a storytelling piece. And then I met, in the meantime, I had met Jeremy Boxer, my co-director and collaborator on this, and who was really taken by the story. And he had come to 1001 Nights. And afterwards we were talking, and he was like, yeah, well, in the talk, maybe there should be animation. And I went, hold up, you need to know the story of my discovery of the nights. It involves puppets. And he's like, what? So I told him what happened, and he's like, oh, that's the story, and it's this story within a story within a story within a story, just like 1001 Nights is a story within a story within a story. And in the meantime, because of the success of 1001 Nights, the event we had co-created, we had a second date, like immediately, in August. And so that sparked a fire in me, and I had June and July to essentially create what is now Azad, the script and everything. And, for the 1001 Nights section, we had puppets made, with our puppeteer, and so handmade leather puppets made specifically for the characters in that story, in addition to using the puppets of my great grandfather. And it all was so organic and just felt so divinely inspired and led. It just it snowballed. And then, in August, we performed it, at 1001 Night, the second 1001 Nights. And it really it crystallized. I never forget the moment I was performing this. And when I get to the point where I say, and this went on for 1001 Nights, there were audible gasps in the audience, because the theme of the event, completely clicked into place. It wasn't just an event called Elevate or Spiral, or you know what I mean, some sort of spiritual whatever that's not connected to something. It had real sort of layers of connection, and the healing aspect was deeply threaded, throughout the thing. And so that's kind of how it came about. And after that performance and the response, it was okay, there's something here that we can build on. And in the fall, I went back to Syria, since the first time since that trip 3 years ago. And, there's a young production company, and I have a partner there, Antoine Macdis, and we recorded sounds. I took film equipment. They have nothing there, VR film equipment and sound equipment, and recorded sound. So those sounds are in the show. They're literally embedded in the soundscape. It's a multi-sensorial experience of taking you back. Really, it's, in the specificity of art is its universality, right? So this is a piece about the coexistence of shadow and light, of finding treasure in rubble. And that is our paradox, of in this being human thing, that it's all of these, the complexity, and this and this are true, at the same time. And it's hard because we're always trying to make things definitive, this is this and that is that, and life is begging us to expand our capacity around it, and understand that we can sit with all that. We can sit with darkness. We can. And that it transforms. Everything is constantly transforming. Nothing is static. So, yeah.
And would you say then the purpose of life is transformation or growth?
Yes, I would absolutely say that. We come here with a certain set of cards, and there's no life that is impervious to pain. Straight up, you cannot come into this world, experience butterflies and fairies, and die. That's just not how it goes down. I mean, you're going to have stuff to work through, and it's in that process, that we keep becoming ourselves over and over and over. The truest part of ourselves continuously emerges, and shedding the defenses and things to get to a purer and purer place of love. That's what it is. That's the whole point of this life thing. And all of our relationships are reflections of us and mirrors of us, which is why relationship is such a potent, container for growth. It shows it, but we live in such a world now where, sometimes I feel everything's disposable, disposable razors, disposable friendships, disposable, everything is okay, swipe left, or I don't know which way you swipe to get rid of something. Anyway, showing a little bit of my, I'm a Luddite, but anyway, so, but it's that, right. And it's because you had said earlier, we have this, everything is, our attention spans are shortened. Everything is shortened, and it's that. It feels with human connection, it's this isn't working for me. Next, this isn't working for me, and how much of that, is do you just need to sit and allow, like when it becomes uncomfortable, don't just escape, you know?
Yeah. Well, too, is like when you speak about this house in Syria and the one constant place, it was this one, space that you and your family always had to go to. And now it's abandoned and it's transcending. It's taken new form. And right now I look around a lot of people are choosing to live life as being locationally independent or,
Yes.
traveling the world. And so these spaces of consistency do become more rare. And as we're swiping right or swiping left, a little bit of why, the purpose, the intention behind We Deepen from the beginning was, let's get offline and let's be together in person. And we are a relationship company. Yes. And, in this moment, there's a little bit of what's happening inside of me. It's like, I've recently entered a new relationship, and it's something that this relationship feels really good on my nervous system. And it's something that it's one that I'm just really like excited. It feels different. And also in this moment, you reminded me that it doesn't mean that I met him and now all of a sudden the rainbows and butterflies and happily ever after is going to happen. And I'm like, fuck. Like,
yeah, girl.
Like,
wait for it.
No.
No. Wait for it, my love. Wait for it, because it's coming. And in the beginning, it's that, right? To people come together, in this kind of organic, beautiful way, and calms your nervous, all those things, right? That
and they don't always calm your nervous system in the beginning, though.
But for you, I'm saying, but for you, like in this moment, but that ain't the end, girl. This is the beginning, and it's just like that'll get established, and then your stuff will start to come up because you are teachers to each other in relationship. Actually, you're teachers that are sharpening and helping like mold your better self. Like that's, and so what is your capacity to sit in discomfort, to see your shit and not run, to not make it about the other person, to go, oh, fuck, like this is a pattern I've had when this comes up, and to recognize, and all those things take patience, like to take it back to Scheherazade, like looking at it from the space of like healing, that takes patience, Christina. It takes slowing down. And in a culture of swipe, throw this away, throw that away, get a new one, it's the antithesis of patience. It's like we are in a hypercharged, like the speed at which the world runs now is to me violent. It's violent. And I remember giving a talk. About this in New York City around storytelling with Daniel Pinchbeck, right? The guy who wrote Breaking Open the Head. And this was pre-COVID. And it's funny because when COVID happened, I was like, like I was one of the people, I was relieved. I was like, I get to meditate more, and I get to actually read these books that I feel like I don't have time to read because I'm always in like deliver mode, and in like feeling this like intense like competition of needing to get my stuff out and needing to produce and be productive. We work on these like patriarchal like time schedules too, like even our like 7-day weeks, 5-day work days, like it doesn't account for like as women, like our cyclical nature, how we are different, like every week of our cycle, like hormonally, literally, which means our powers and our gifts are different depending on where we are in our cycle. But all of that is completely dismissed, has been dismissed, to the point where like I hear stories of women, there was this agent I knew who literally like scheduled her C-section in between like premieres of her clients' movies, and 4 hours after her C-section was sending out emails. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, what the, like, oh my God, where have we gone? So when COVID happened, I was so relieved. I was like, oh, time, And yeah, so patience, it's like, it's such a virtue, and it's so in terms of like understanding ourselves and healing,
Mm.
healing in his patience.
Yeah, the patience and the time, and also, you know, yesterday I had a day where I was feeling a little stagnant in my energy and slowness, and there was a little, there's a little like chirping on my shoulder, being like, "What are you doing with your time? Why don't you get up and do something? What do you have so much to do? You have all these things to do, and here you are, just like, doing nothing. Like, what's going on?"
Of course.
It is the, there's so much progression that also can happen in the slowness. What I'm curious about is, I have experienced and have many friends who've experienced, and I've studied this, narcissistic relationships.
Yes.
And it sounds as though, I could say that I can come to a conclusion that the king in 1001 Nights is like this narcissist psychopath.
Yes.
And oftentimes within the I guess the sometimes of like it's your own trauma, you've got to work through your own feelings and don't blame other people.
Right.
How do you, looking at this story and see, because I brought up love as in also has boundaries. So many people will stay in relationships because they think that they can change or help transform or heal somebody. And as I've been following Dr. Ramani's work, who's one of the leading experts in narcissism for years now. And she looks at a particular market like Los Angeles. Yes. And she's like, estimates that probably, 30% of the population has narcissistic personality disorder. So if you think of narcissism on a spectrum, they're really far on the spectrum, and being with those people can really just fuck you up.
It really can. Yeah.
So how do you, I sometimes I think of this story and I'm like, wait, is it promoting, being in toxic relationships?
Yeah. No, I can totally see how that would be. And then, in the show, it's like I tell the story and then it's like, yeah, I know this is fucked up. It looks really fucked up. But like, let's kind of, again, pull back and dispel and dismantle the gender stuff around it. Like the king is the man, and look at it as literally all of the characters are parts of us, right? So the king is the traumatized part of us. The queen is the trauma, right? So whatever trauma, and Scheherazade is the healthy part of us, right? Who's able to like recognize and therefore see these things. So ultimately it's all an inside job, of all of these things coming together. So in no way am I promoting, that, to look at it in a literal way of like, oh, this woman who just like sacrifices herself and but it's a part of us that like, can we amplify that part of us that's able to see beyond these things? And that's really what it comes to. But I completely hear you and that's each person's journey, like in relationship. And yes, narcissism in this town, is like epidemic. Just that self-centeredness, right? Of me. And it's sad because it's like often we don't recognize that, like, even in our despair, like this happened to me, and you can have the greatest excuse for like the shit you're going through. But the thing I know that like all the wisdom teachings have taught, and the teachers and the Eastern philosophies, it's like once you can understand that it's through serving others, it's through being there for others, that you actually begin to unravel your own stuff instead of completely continuing to concentrate. I have this childhood wound. I have that, continuing to build your story of trauma and victimhood and why you're like this and why you're like that. Just fucking like get off yourself, and go help someone else. Center someone else. Give your psyche a break from its like victimhood story, to help rewrite it, right? Open up. When you are serving others, your heart naturally expands. That's why people go volunteer, why people go to soup kitchens, because it just creates a sense of solidarity and community and like usefulness. You know what I mean? Being able to like serve another human being amplifies our goodness, and helps us have a different understanding of ourselves. But in a town where it's also so much like, for me to have means you can't have, it's a story of lack often. Narcissism is a story of lack. Like, if you have, that means I don't. So you can't have, like, it's interesting because, I'm in this industry, I'm a storyteller, and people, an actor and a writer in this town particularly are so precious with who they introduce each other to and connections. I mean, there's so much like cachet in that. And it's like, someone will make one introduction. I come back to you like, oh, so did I get a producer credit now? And it's like, what the hell? And meanwhile, like, I get off on connecting people. Like, I love bringing together like seemingly disparate things in my world and be like, you two need to meet because there is something there, like, it thrills me, right? And again, it's like community, like mindedness and understanding that like when I amplify you, it can't help but amplify me because everything is interdependent. So that reframe in and of itself, like, it's not all about me. What am I actually? I'm a compilation of all my experiences, all the people I've met, everything before me, the generations that came from me. I am not my own singular entity. I'm a culmination of everything, that's constantly shifting and changing. So these are the antidotes, in my humble opinion, that we could subscribe to. That would shift a lot for ourselves. And when we shift ourselves, we shift our communities. And when we shift our communities, we shift our world. I mean,
yeah, totally. Yeah. Getting outside of yourself. Also to even realizing that we're all doing the work in every moment. Like, one of the vulnerable things about having a podcast is that I might say something in one moment and then the podcast ends and I think differently. But I said it in one way and somebody attaches, that thought to you. But that's not necessarily me. It's what's essentially always moving through me. And it's interesting from these, like, I'm such a connector as well. I love introducing people to other people.
I got that the minute I met you. Yeah.
And I'd like to almost see it sometimes, and it's reminding me in this moment of sometimes we get so attached to life and, death is real too. And it's this unknown mystery type thing. A lot of people, I guess, have been, exploring it through psychedelics of like death to my ego and whatnot. And sometimes, I like to live a life where I feel as though if I was like, I'm not, my livelihood isn't restricting anything from happening or moving forward. And I've seen people do that sometimes with like naming or like, this is my idea, this is this. And I'm like, okay, well, when you die, someone can just do that. Why, why hoard this stuff in your livelihood?
Yes.
And then I think in like the rethinking of, while it's, there's grieving that comes to it, when I bring up this narcissism, there's an episode, probably about maybe 3 episodes before this one's release, where I speak to a friend, and it's an episode. It's called Bonding Over the Loss of a Friend. And Christopher, who recorded that episode, him and I had a friend, Vanessa, who a year ago, it's actually probably, oh my gosh, like a year ago on Monday, she passed away 2 weeks after she married. And only 8 months after she met the man that she married, who was in her death, had learned of, his psychopath, narcissistic tendencies where he kind of lured her in to a new reality and a new life. And 5 days after her passing, he shot himself. Yeah. So it was one of those stories that you're just like, whoa. And we've had to, her friends, her family, we've all have this story to put ourselves at peace with. And I think where we put ourselves at peace with, this is where even when I hear 1,001 Nights and, the wife died and the kids died and a new woman died each day, is that how I put myself at peace with Vanessa is that there is a transcendence that is happening in their death. There is still transformation that is happening of the souls, and it's thinking beyond this one lifetime. And so the patience and the healing, which is strange to be human and to be like, yeah, and when I die and I come back, like we're continuing, right. But I do believe in reincarnation, and in that it's not one's lifetime's journey to heal all pain and suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. Each soul has their own journey, I mean, in my own individual practice, it's like, I sit there every day in Vipassana meditation. Vipassana means, insight, to see clearly, like you're sitting to see clearly reality as it is moment by moment by moment, which is, always shifting. And there's no subscription to like, you will get to liberation if you do it like this. And there's a timeline. Everybody's got their own, soul journey, but the path to liberation really, it questions. So the name of the show, Azad means free in Armenian, And so what is freedom, because like in our communities and circles, it's like free, okay, free love, okay, polyamory, okay, like there's all these ideas of freedom, that people have, not being bound and whatnot. But I guess with myself, I'm asking these questions of like, what is true freedom? And, in my own sort of, like Buddhist practice, it's the freedom of the mind from being bound to anything that keeps it stuck, that entangles it in a place and with attachment and needing something to be this way or that way. It's like, ultimately, we are going to die. That is a fact. That is the ultimate letting go. And so in this practice, it's like, how can I continue to move towards that understanding and let go? Continuously let go, which is where like true liberation, let go of my ideas of myself in every moment, my definitions of myself, my being married to my stories, and this is this and that is that, like continuously letting go, continuously seeing what's happening in front of me right now as a new information that can shift what was happening before, as opposed to being like calcified and solidified in my knowing. This is this, that is that. That's actually trauma response. The brain, when trauma happens, gets calcified. The prefrontal cortex gets turned off. It's the part of our brain that sees, that has logic and imagination and is able to, imagine things being differently than they are. That part of our mind literally shuts down. It shuts down that part of our mind. And it makes our limbic system, which is like scouring for threats, like the back of our mind, like it makes it in overdrive. So we're constantly looking for anything that looks like the thing that traumatized us. So imagine these two things coming together. Prefrontal cortex, which is our capacity to imagine things being differently, goes offline. And the part of us that's scouring for threats gets hyped up, right? Bad combination. So we get really married into, these people are like that. This situation is like that. And we begin to operate from those places, which is being bound, which is the opposite of freedom.
We had said, I can't remember if we had shared this before we hit record on this podcast or after, but it said something of like, this idea of life being rainbows and butterflies, and realistically, we're all going to suffer.
Yes.
And maybe there's an arc in life of, coming through, and then you arc through the shit in the journey, and then you come out the other side. And generally it happens as an elder, is what I hear. Is it, are we like stopping ourselves from the idea that if we take in contentment, like as opposed to happiness being what we strive for, but like we're really are okay with contentment.
Yes. You're hitting on something.
Then is it possible to have the rainbows and butterflies? And
well, here's the thing. You said something like we're all going to suffer, and in my understanding of this practice of the last 6-7 years, that's what would be dispelled by Buddhism. You don't have to suffer. There is pain. No life does not have pain, but suffering is resistance to pain. Suffering is running away from pain. Suffering is avoiding the pain. But the irony of this crazy joke of a life is the more you run away, the more it gets amplified, because you're supposed to be able, you gotta feel it to heal it. The only way out is through. Like, you've heard all these like pithy sayings that kind of like summarize it in a cute way, but they make sense, like the only way out is through. And so if you're avoiding, if you're running, it's just like, it's about becoming conscious. It's about seeing things as they are and continuing to let go in that, so that to me is liberation. So pain, you cannot avoid. Suffering, we create. Suffering, we create. And liberation, true liberation, is understanding that, understanding that.
You are so wise. You know that, right?
I mean, I've heard that said before. Thank you. I mean, I've been on such a journey, Christina.
Yeah. Your background, your experiences are very multifaceted. That you can hear it through your lens and how you speak and articulate, and even your studies. Like, there's deep intellectual wisdom that you have accessed and studied and observed. It comes to you.
Thank you. These are I'm just here trying to figure out, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Even like my death, like since I'm thinking of death, like since I was a kid, I was like obsessed by it. I'm like, death, what is that? How is that? And then after a while, I came to be like, okay, do I remember where I was before I was born? Like, have you ever asked yourself that question? Mm-hmm. Where was I before I was born? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, I think it'll be like that. You know what I mean? I don't remember where I was before I was born. So it'll be like that. Like, what is there to fear here? Like, we're given this moment of time. We don't know how long. It's less than 100 years, but who knows what it is? We have no idea. This could be our last day on earth. I don't know, no, neither do you. And it's ultimately this poem and this joke. Like, life is those two things, and whenever I've taken it to be so like, for so many years, like, this darkness and this inheritance of genocide and this, and then the war and Syria, all of this stuff, my marriage crumbling, me having to individuate, and just all my sense of self having dismantled and having to be remantled, and all of it. And then it's just like, what the fuck? At the end of the day, it means nothing. I'm a blip in the thing. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a poem. Like, it's a poem as well, and the ways we meet people and how they mirror us and reflect the things we need at that time. Like, there is some kind of chaotic but divine order, that regulates it all. And it's fucking fascinating. Like, who is this guy? Who is this person, this entity, this thing? What is this life thing, I remember being on a medicine journey. Can I talk about that?
Yeah, totally.
On ayahuasca. And it was like, it was the worst night of my fucking life. Like I died 10 times. It was like 10 hours of purging. And it was like when my marriage was falling apart and just the weeping, like sitting outside in the desert and watching the Milky Way galaxy shift and being like, oh my God, this man will always be this poet in my life, but needing to release. And just, I'm purging and purging. And there is this moment where there's nothing left to purge. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh my God, make it stop. And I hear, so make it stop. Like in this like serpentine, little mischievous. And I'm start laughing, I'm like, oh my God, and I'm like, no, this struggle. And I hear, you're the fight. You're the struggle. And I was cackling to myself and and I'm going, who made this up? This life thing? Who made it up? Like, you motherfuckers. Like, it's like that, I mean, yeah, it can just blow your mind. And I remember coming out of it and the shaman chick was with me because I had this crazy collapse. I thought I was losing my mind. I had this collapse. And the next thing I knew, they had brought me back to the main room and I woke up, I opened my eyes and I was like, I lost my mind. And I looked at the shaman and she's just like looking at me and I went, but who needs that shit anyways? And she's like, that's right. Who needs that shit anyways? Because it's ultimately our mind, Christina, our mind. I mean, in Buddhism, it's like in the Dhammapada, it says mind precedes all mental states. They are all mind wrought. So it's the mind. Again, it's our frame. It's how we are seeing things. Like it's one thing to say we're co-creating with the universe. It's another thing to viscerally understand we are co-creating with this universe, like what we are putting out, how we see the world, how we define or not define things. That is our reality. It's like there was something I read once that said, however you think it is, you're right.
It's it's our framing. It's, and the mind is just a funny thing. It's wild that we trust it with anything.
Yeah. It's like, don't believe everything you think. You know what I mean? Like, because that's what it is, these thoughts. And so we can't ultimately, it's like, we have to come to a place where we have more autonomy over what's happening in our mind, So to sit there and look at that helps us create a different ground from which to experience this life thing.
I wrote that down. Yeah. By the way, don't believe everything you think.
Yes.
That's a really good, great reminder. And even for me, if I'm like an intuitive, I get these intuitive hits.
Yes.
However, sometimes you get the intuitive hits and then you bring it up into the brain and you start analyzing their brain. And you're like, wait, what the fuck happened? I just had this intuitive hits. And now all of a sudden I'm wasting all this energy in my brain, like scattered, trying to like intellectualize it and figure it out to make it. And it was like, it was just right there. It was just trust the body. Trust the body that it's coming from that place. What a fascinating conversation with you. Thank you so much for making the space and time. I cannot wait to see the show myself. Yeah. I know it's going to be fantastic this weekend. And if those who miss it this weekend, there will be future opportunities. But if you are listening right now, the show is happening. There's how many shows happening this weekend? There's
5 shows over 3 days. So it's April 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. On the 21st and 22nd, it's 2 shows, 6:30 and 8:30. And on the 23rd, it's 1 show at 7:30 at the Pico Playhouse in Los Angeles. And the other show is called Azad. You can go to... will there be links and stuff?
It'll be on WeDeepen.com. Yep. They can go in there. They can use the promo code WeDeepen. Get 10% off. Go and see the show. It's going to be a super special experience. I would say to bring a significant other, bring friends.
Yes.
definitely the story of our capacity for transformation and healing through trauma. And it will be a transformational experience. You have a lot to talk about afterwards. This is where we go deep. We deepen here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's been amazing talking to you. Thank you so much. I mean, community, it's everything is community and sharing and like helping amplify each other's like, potential and understanding. Like we all do it through each other,
We all do it through each other, connecting the dots.
Yeah. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you.
You're welcome. And also too, if people want to discover you or find you on social media, what's the best place to go?
My handle on Instagram is my name and last name. So Sona Tatoyan, SonaTatoyan. That's one way. I think. What else is another way? Website, similar, my website. And yeah, that's that. Yeah. Information on the nonprofit, my nonprofit company, Hakawati, which is producing the piece. So hakawati.org, HAKAWATI.org. So yeah, it's an organization to help amplify the voices of like marginalized and frontline communities through their storytelling and sharing. And, we work with healers and therapists and scientists and storytellers to sort of look at these issues and from a kind of hyphenated, multi-aspected way. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all you do in the world. It's so fascinating. It's so interesting. Storytellers, I, call them out to the further to amplify their voices. And that's what makes life so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah,
thank you for this
absolutely.
episode and for all you do in the world. And thank you everybody for listening to another episode of Deepen with Christina. If you enjoy this podcast, share it with your friends, like it, subscribe, leave a comment. You can also always send me an email, c@wedeepen.com. Again, go check out that calendar. If you have an experience in your local market coming up, whether it's a festival, a workshop, please do go ahead and reach out to us, and we will send you an application. You can apply to have it listed at wedeepen.com as well. We have many exciting things coming up to share with you, so make sure you keep tuning in. And until next time, enjoy. Bye.